The moment the referee's whistle blows on the very first match of the 2026 FIFA World Cup, football history will officially turn a page forever, because this is not just another opening game. This is the birth of a completely new era, the first kickoff of the biggest World Cup the sport has ever seen, hosted across 3 nations, played by 48 teams, watched by billions, and carrying the weight of the future of football on its shoulders. And as the stadium lights blaze and the cameras zoom in, the world will be reminded that every World Cup, no matter how modern or commercialized it becomes, still begins the same way, with one match, one ball, and one moment that unites the planet. And this opening game of 2026 will be held at the legendary Estadio Azteca in Mexico City, a stadium that already feels like sacred ground for football fans, because it is the only stadium in history to host 2 World Cup finals in 1970 and 1986, where Pelé lifted the trophy, where Maradona created magic, and now, decades later, where a brand new World Cup era will officially begin. And that symbolism is not accidental, because FIFA knows exactly what it is doing by choosing this venue. It is sending a message that even as football expands, modernizes, and commercializes, its soul still lives in moments, memories, and history. And as Mexico steps onto the pitch as the opening match host, the pressure will be enormous, because host nations don't just play the opening game, they carry the expectations of an entire tournament. They represent tradition, atmosphere, passion, and pride. And the opening match is never just about points. It is about setting the tone for everything that follows, about telling the world whether this World Cup will feel electric or forgettable, chaotic or controlled, legendary or lukewarm. And in 2026, that pressure is multiplied, because this tournament is different from anything we've ever seen before. For the first time ever, 48 teams will compete, meaning more matches, more nations, more stories, more underdogs, more upsets, and more chaos than any World Cup in history. And that very first match becomes the symbolic gateway to all of it, because once the ball moves, there is no turning back. The debates end, the predictions mean nothing, and football takes over completely. And what makes this opening match even more fascinating is that it is not about the final, it is not about the trophy, but it often becomes one of the most watched games of the entire tournament, because curiosity is at its peak. Fans want to see how the hosts look, how the new format feels, how the stadiums appear, how the atmosphere translates on screen, and whether the World Cup magic still exists in an era dominated by social media, VAR controversies, and endless debates. And historically, opening World Cup matches are strange games. They are tense, cautious, emotional, and unpredictable, because teams are nervous, legs are heavy, expectations are sky high, and one mistake can live forever in history. And as the opening match of 2026 kicks off, millions of players around the world will be watching not just as fans, but as dreamers, kids in streets, academies, and living rooms, realizing that this is the stage they want to reach one day. And that is the invisible power of the first World Cup match. It doesn't just entertain, it inspires. And the 2026 opener carries even more weight, because it is the first time a World Cup is truly continental, stretching across the United States, Mexico, and Canada, meaning football is no longer visiting one nation, it is taking over an entire region. And that opening match becomes the ceremonial opening of a football festival that spans thousands of miles, dozens of cities, and cultures that approach the game in completely different ways. And as the anthems play before kickoff, every note will feel heavier, because the players will know they are not just playing for 3 points, they are playing to be remembered as the first names written into the history books of this new World Cup era. The first goal scorer, the first assist provider, the first VAR decision, the first controversy, the first celebration, all of it will live forever. And football history loves firsts, because firsts are untouchable. No matter how many goals are scored later, no matter how dramatic the final becomes, nothing replaces the opening moment. And this is why fans still remember Shipiwe Chabalala's goal in 2010, why they remember hosts winning or struggling in opening matches, why these games feel bigger than they should on paper. And in 2026, with the eyes of the world watching, every pass will feel slower, every shot louder, every mistake more brutal, and every goal absolutely explosive. And beyond the pitch, this first match represents a massive test for FIFA itself, because critics have questioned whether a 48-team World Cup will dilute quality, whether too many matches will reduce intensity, whether the tournament will lose its soul. And this opening match becomes the first answer to those doubts, because if the atmosphere is electric, if the football is sharp, if the moment feels special, then fans will believe again. But if it feels flat, commercial, or artificial, the criticism will only grow louder, and that pressure sits quietly behind every kickoff. And as the match unfolds, commentators will constantly remind viewers that this is the biggest World Cup ever, the first of its kind, and that phrase alone changes everything, because it means records will be broken not just on the pitch, but in viewership, viewership, attendance, social media engagement, and global reach, and this opening match will dominate timelines, headlines, and conversations across every platform, from living rooms to cafes to mobile phones, and for 90 minutes, the world will once again pause for football. And when the final whistle blows, regardless of the scoreline, the most important thing will have already happened. The World Cup will be alive, the journey will have officially begun, and from that moment on, there will be no escape from the drama, the heartbreak, the miracles, and the madness that only a World Cup can deliver. Because every tournament starts with hope, but only one ends with glory. And the first match of the 2026 World Cup is the spark that lights the fire, the opening chapter of a story that will take weeks to finish, but years to forget. And decades later, fans will still say, "I remember where I was when the 2026 World Cup began." Because that is the power of the first match. It doesn't just start a tournament, it starts memories, legacies, and history itself. As the echoes of that opening whistle fade and the first match of the 2026 World Cup becomes officially complete, the real story actually begins afterward, because the opening game is never remembered only for what happens on the pitch, it is remembered for what it reveals about everything that follows. And in 2026, that revelation will be dissected from every angle imaginable. Pundits will freeze frames, fans will replay moments on social media, critics will zoom in on every flaw, and supporters will cling to every positive sign, because this first match doesn't just decide 3 points, it shapes narratives, expectations, and emotional momentum for the entire tournament. And immediately after the final whistle, the world will begin asking the same question it always asks after an opening World Cup match. What did we just witness? Was this the beginning of something special, or the warning sign of chaos? And those questions will matter more than ever, because this tournament is bigger, longer, and more complex than any World Cup before it, and that means early impressions carry extraordinary weight. And one of the biggest talking points emerging from this opening game will be the new format itself, because with 48 teams involved, fans will be watching closely to see whether the intensity feels diluted or enhanced, whether players look fresher or overwhelmed, whether matches feel like must-watch events or early group stage formalities. And this first match will be used as evidence by both sides of the argument. Supporters of expansion will point to the atmosphere, the energy, the global reach, and the inclusivity, while critics will highlight any lack of sharpness, any cautious play, any moment that feels less than elite. And the opening game becomes the ammunition in a debate that has been raging for years. And beyond format discussions, attention will immediately shift to the host nation's performance, because history shows us that how a host begins often predicts how their entire tournament unfolds. A confident opening win can lift a nation and create belief that carries teams deep into the knockout stages, while a nervous draw or defeat can plant seeds of doubt that never fully disappear. And in 2026, that psychological effect is magnified, because hosting responsibilities are shared, meaning every co-host nation will be watching closely, measuring themselves against that first performance, wondering if the pressure helped or harmed. And as fans analyze the opening match, another layer of intrigue will dominate conversation: the role of technology, because this World Cup will likely feature the most advanced VAR systems, semi-automated offsides, data tracking, and broadcast enhancements football has ever seen. And the first match will be the first real stress test of those systems under maximum pressure. And whether it's a controversial decision, a delayed check, or a perfectly executed call, whatever happens will instantly become a global talking point, because fans don't just watch football anymore, they judge it, clip it, meme it, and debate it endlessly. And one controversial moment in the opening match can define the tone of officiating discussions for the rest of the tournament. And while analysts debate tactics and technology, players themselves will be processing something far more emotional, because for many of them, this opening match is the peak of their careers. Not everyone at a World Cup goes on to play in a final, not everyone scores a goal, not everyone becomes a hero, but everyone who steps onto the pitch in the first match becomes part of history. And years later, when fans look back, these players will always be remembered as the ones who started it all. And that sense of immortality changes how people perceive performance, because even a simple pass, a tackle, or a celebration in the opening match is preserved forever in highlight reels, documentaries, and retrospectives. And this is why nerves are often highest in Game 1, because players aren't just playing opponents, they are playing history. And as the tournament progresses into its second, third, and fourth days, the opening match will continue to be referenced constantly. Commentators will compare every new performance to that first game, asking whether teams look sharper, faster, braver, or more cautious. And the opening match becomes the baseline, the standard against which everything else is measured. And this comparison culture feeds into another massive element of the 2026 World Cup, global storytelling, because this tournament will produce more content than any World Cup before it. Reaction videos, tactical breakdowns, fan vlogs, AI-generated clips, debates, polls, and controversies will flood every platform, and the opening match is the seed from which all of that grows. The first viral clip, the first iconic image, the first moment that dominates timelines. And as attention shifts toward the upcoming fixtures, something subtle but powerful will happen. Belief will spread, because every underdog watching that opening match will see possibility. They will think, if this is the level, if this is the intensity, if this is the pressure, then maybe we belong here too. And that belief is dangerous for favorites, because expanded tournaments thrive on chaos, and the opening match doesn't just start the World Cup, it signals whether chaos is coming. And historically, when opening matches feel unpredictable, tournaments tend to deliver shock results, giant killings, and unforgettable stories. And that possibility excites fans more than perfection ever could, because football isn't loved for control, it's loved for uncertainty. And the first match of 2026 will quietly whisper whether this World Cup is going to be wild or measured. And as days turn into weeks, knockout rounds approach, and legends begin to emerge, the opening match will fade slightly from daily conversation, but it will never truly disappear, because when the tournament reaches its climax, when the semifinals and final arrive, broadcasters will replay footage from that first game, reminding viewers where it all began, showing how the journey started before heroes were crowned and villains revealed. And this narrative loop is what makes World Cups feel complete, because they are not just tournaments, they are stories with beginnings, middles, and endings. And when the final whistle of the final match eventually blows, and a new champion is crowned, fans will instinctively think back to the first kickoff, the first roar of the crowd, the first touch of the ball, realizing that everything they witnessed was set in motion by that opening game. And years later, when the 2026 World Cup is discussed in documentaries, debates, and nostalgia-filled conversations, the opening match will always return as the starting point, the moment football changed shape, expanded its borders, and stepped into a new era. Because whether people loved or hated the 48-team format, whether they praised or criticized the hosting model, whether they celebrated or complained about technology, one truth will remain undeniable. The 2026 World Cup began with one match that carried the weight of the past and the uncertainty of the future. And in that sense, the opening game was never about goals or results. It was about transformation, about football proving once again that no matter how much it evolves, it still knows how to bring the world together for 90 minutes. And that is why the first match of the 2026 World Cup will not just be remembered as a game, but as the moment the future of football officially arrived.